Jen, you want to say anything before we get going?
Sure. My cat would like to say hello to everyone. This presentation is by John Fallon. Is that how you say your last name? Fallon?
Yes, that's correct. Just like
Um,
Jimmy Fallon, my cousin.
I love it. All right. Yeah, I'm just going to toss it over to you. If anyone has questions during the session and wants to put them in the chat, feel free. I assume there'll be some time at the end where you can respond to those, John.
Okay, thank you very much, Jen.
It's
I'm
your,
going to share my screen now. I'm John Fallon. I'm an English instructor, just retired in June. And now I'm adjuncting, so I get to see that side of things. And so let's get in the presentation because that could slow walk the presentation here without starting late. All right, let me see, slideshow from beginning. Okay, are we good? Are you seeing the right thing? Okay. So an argument for compassion. And I want to explain why it should be a core value and how to demonstrate it to students. I feel like this could be the biggest thing that I bring to the classroom. I'm just going to assume we can all teach writing. Like, what's that intangible we can bring that could really make a difference in students' lives? And I feel it's compassion. I just threw this slide in there. Like, things changed for me in 2012 when I took that verbal judo training. You know, I was the Alice liaison at my college for the active shooter. And I made friends with the police department, local police department. They did a week training and I was a college liaison. And they said, John, you'll need to look into this thing called verbal judo, and it's a conflict resolution. So anyhow, I went away for 1 week, lived in a dorm at the Ohio Police Officer Training Academy, a state highway patrolman, a kid 22 was my roommate, you know, the haircut, the glasses, the gun, the physique, you know, but he went somewhere else for the training and I went to the verbal judo. In any event, I was so enthralled with the training, the conflict de-escalation. I just kept taking these trainings and getting these certificates. So that's why I put it on there. Then I took an ethical protector training. Then I took preventing school violence. Cleveland Clinic training I'm going to talk about in a minute because this presentation has a lot to do with healthcare. And then I took the mental health first aid training. So really, like, school started over for me in 2012. Now I just retired, but I'm still doing these things. In fact, I taught the de-escalation training to the RAs here at this university and at another university. And so I'm like, I've taught it to the domestic violence shelter in town. Like, I'm always like, who wants to learn about it? Because I'm dying to teach it. I feel it's so great. So in any event, that's my background. I need to move your pictures like right over my words. There we go. So those are our learning objectives. Understand the difference between empathy and compassion, why compassion is a desirable core value, and some ways to demonstrate it. I was going to have breakouts at the end, but it feels like we're small enough to have just our breakout right in here, but we'll see. Okay, so I read this on Twitter and it kind of struck me. And it says we can land a helicopter on Mars and a probe on a comet, but can't get COVID-19 vaccines to all people in all countries. And this is when India was having that huge breakout last spring. And the doctor said that we're never scientifically bankrupt, we're morally bankrupt. And I feel like that applies to us as educators. Like, we have the diplomas, we have the degrees, our students will do the same. But from a moral point of view, what are we doing? Okay, this isn't going to work, so I'm just going to have to do it without my notes because I already explained to Jen how I have 2 computers, 2 screens. My notes are on this other page, and it's just too crazy. So hopefully I'll remember my notes. All right, this is from a bus accident in Sweden. It was in the book Compassionomics. I'd highly recommend you take a look at that book, Compassionomics. It's where I got a lot of my data from this presentation. It was written by a couple doctors, like a meta-analysis of the data on how compassion influences patient outcomes. But in any event, this story was on page 1 of the book, and 2 buses sideswiped each other, literally like the one bus, the side was sheared off. 6 people died, the other 56, everyone was injured. And they took them to multiple hospitals. They couldn't all fit in one hospital. And some of the patients were minorly injured. Some died. And one of the patients recounted that, he couldn't get a ride home. And the staff told him that, well, the bus comes to this hospital, you could take the bus home. So to me, that would be an example of, lack of compassion. Like they'll probably never take a bus again in their lives. So in any event, when they surveyed all the survivors 5 years later and asked them, what do you remember about this accident? And two answers predominated. And one was they remembered the incredible pain. And the second one was they remembered the lack of compassion at the medical facility. And remember, they were spread out over multiple medical facilities. So it wasn't endemic just to that hospital, but really to healthcare, at least in Sweden where this accident happened. Okay, this is a picture of the Cleveland Clinic in Abu Dhabi. They made a partnership with them in 2013. I think this opened in 2015 or 17. And the head of the Cleveland Clinic at that time, Toby Cosgrove, he went over for the dedication ceremony. And the King of Saudi Arabia was giving a speech. And while I was giving a speech, he teared up, like how this facility is going to change lives. And everyone in the audience was tearing up. And I don't know if because of the king cries, you cry, or if he really was hitting a nerve with the people. In any event, when the dedication ceremony was over, the medical students from one of the universities were there, and one came up and talked to the CEO of the Cleveland Clinic. And she said, I'm studying to be a heart doctor, and my dad is a heart doctor, and he's having heart problems. And he was going to go to the Cleveland Clinic, but he heard the Cleveland Clinic doctors didn't have empathy. So he's decided to go to this other place. So anyway, caught the attention, both the audience is crying during the King's speech and the student coming up to him. And eventually, the Cleveland Clinic established this course. It's an 8-hour course in relationship-centered provider-patient communication strategies. So I found out about this course and I took it. My college paid for me $1,000 to go and take the course. It was interesting. There was just 12 of us in the room, beautiful training building. It had this training building. We're the only ones in there, like a Victorian building. And I was in there with all these smart doctors. They were all like around 40, give or take. And we did a pre and a post, and they gave us all iPads. And so when we all sat down at the conference table, they gave us the iPad. I was the last one out. So even though I'm an English teacher, I was still the slowest reader, which is surprising. I think I'm a fast reader. And so just a comment on how quick the doctors are. And when we spent a whole day together, ate lunch together, took breaks together, role played together. And when we were done, they put us back in the conference room with our iPads again to do the post assessment. Once again, I was the last one to finish, so I was the last one out of the room. And you know what really struck me? No one said goodbye. There were 11 doctors in that room. We just did 8 hours of empathy training, and no one said goodbye. When they finished, they just stood up and left. I thought like maybe it could be me because I'm an outsider, but they didn't even say goodbye to each other. So that just told me, wow, it's harder to teach empathy. You can't build it in just 8 hours, even though they had this great course. So, hey, the difference between empathy and action. And by the way, doing this presentation on my screen, I'm only seeing the slides. So I feel like out on an island here. So feel free to stop me at any time, even though once I get through the slide part, then we're going to have discussion. And you can see the difference between empathy and compassion. Empathy is, feelings or understanding, and compassion is you just add an action to it. So empathy is where compassion starts, but action is where compassion finishes. I picked this one up off the Washington Post, I think at Twitter, the story of the various Peters. You see the young man on the left in his home living room. He's probably has some type of honor student, the sash. And you can see like how proud he is. And he's wearing his best tennis shoes, like the black leather with a white trim. Well, in any event, no tennis shoes at graduation. So whoever the teacher was who was checking the kids in before they walked across the stage and picked up their diploma, noticed the various had tennis shoes. She told him you can't walk. Now look at that kid on the left. You see how excited he is to graduate, and he's an honor student? So he's walking around the center, wherever they're having the graduation, and Mr. Butler sees him. He says, DeVarius, what's wrong? He says, I'm not allowed to walk across the stage in my shoes. So you can see on that picture, if you look close enough, Mr. Butler gave him his shoes. DeVarius wears a 9. Mr. Butler's in 11, so he probably just slid across the stage. But that would be an act of compassion, you know, the old joke of give him his shoes, you know, don't just say, geez, I'm sorry about what happened, but actually do a thing. I mean, that's what it would look like in its perfect form, and that was just this year. Okay, to get into the healthcare, and need to move some of my screen icons a little bit. They asked, the N was 1,300. It was 800 patients and 500 physicians. I think it was, I don't have my notes in front of me. I think it was published in the Harvard Medical Journal, but some really esteemed medical journal. And the question was, do US healthcare professionals provide compassionate care? 78% of the physicians said yes. 54% of the patients said yes. So that gap in perceived performance there. Self is seen by self and self is seen by others. In other words, the physicians don't even know their problem. As far as they know, they are doing compassionate care, where the patients are given a lot lower number on that. Now, in another large scale Harvard survey, patients said that kind treatment by a physician is more important than wait time, travel distance, or cost. Additionally, it said when providers care deeply about patients and patients feel it, patients are more likely to follow through on their prescriptions, take their medicine, and so on. But get that for a minute: wait time, travel distance, and cost. Now, I have epilepsy, and when I didn't know what was happening to me because I got it later in life, it was in 2015. But I knew I was having these episodes, but they weren't grand mal seizures. I didn't know what it was. I don't know. And there's something inside you that says it'll go away. It's a random thing. And eventually it happened one time at home. And I told my wife, we might have to go to the hospital because when it's happening, you can't even keep your balance. Like you could literally be sitting down in a chair and fall out of the chair. Like you can't even figure out why. You have self-awareness, at least I do when it's happening. Like you can feel it coming on. And then it's there. So anyway, my wife said, you have to go to the hospital. And when I went to the hospital, local hospital, it was a bad interaction with the neurologist. Like they checked me in. They said, the doctor will be with you shortly. And then an hour and a half later, the doctor showed up, which to me says that the staff was trained to lie. Like they had to know, like he wasn't even in the building. And, but they told me he'll be with me shortly. And then he was talking with me. It felt like he wasn't present, like he wasn't looking on his phone, but he really wasn't present. It looked like I was keeping him awake. So anyway, we're talking about my brain here. And I went right to my family physician after that. I said, I need another brain doctor. And so she said, where do you want to go? So I'm in Ohio. I said, Ohio State. So she set me up with a neurologist at Ohio State. And he spent an hour with me on the phone. He diagnosed me on the phone. And he prescribed, I was taking my medicine the same day that he diagnosed me after 100 questions in an hour with me on the phone. And I haven't had a seizure since. Now, I made an appointment. I drove to Columbus. They did a brain scan. They did other tests. But I had total trust with this guy. And so I was willing to drive the hour and a half to Columbus and the inconvenience and so on to work with someone I trusted. And I feel like students are the same way. I feel like these principles can apply to school. So here was an example about an anesthesiologist who said that when you make a compassionate connection with the patient, you actually become part of the therapy. And I would say, according to my no credential there on the right, it's not just about the books and the lesson plans, it's also about the professor. When a professor makes a compassionate connection with a student who's attempting to complete assignment or grasp material, I actually become part of the learning process. So I think it's like so much more than the material. And it's really about us. And I feel like compassion's the highway into the trust with the student. Now, here's another interesting study. It was a big study originally done at Massachusetts General Hospital, and it was repeated about 4 times since the original one. And they had a control group and an experimental group. And the only difference is the experimental group were given an extra visit by the anesthesiologist just prior to surgery. And the only purpose of the visit was to build patient-doctor rapport. So the results for the patients who had the extra doctor visit, they were calm but not drowsy entering surgery, and they had a 50% less requirement for opiate pain meds post-surgery, and statistically significant decrease in length of hospital stay. In other words, the relationship established with the anesthesiologist just by the one extra visit immediately prior to surgery. And this is interesting to me because I had a pretty big surgery in July, and I had the same type of experience, a similar type of experience with the anesthesiologist connecting with me momentarily before the surgery. But in any event, the overall result, as you could see, about how the compassionate care resulted in calming effects on patients and more successful surgeries, both from the patient point of view and hospital point of view, because the patient didn't need the pain meds, and they also got out of the hospital quicker, opening up beds for the hospital. And I feel the same could apply to educators. We could have calming effects on students with benefits to the student learning outcomes and scores, and as well as the college by having higher retention rates and also better word of mouth out in the community, because that's one of the, at least in my opinion, that's one of the biggest ways where we get our reputations are by word of mouth. So here's something interesting, and this is how I'm looking at it for us, is a therapeutic alliance. And this is from another study in which physical therapy, in which they had a physical therapy plus, and the therapist used compassionate tone of voice, the nonverbals there, as you can see, and then statements of compassion as well. And so patients who were randomly assigned to the PT plus had more than double the pain relief from the PT plus as compared to the patients who received the physical therapy without the compassion enhancement. And once again, it was just these few verbal and nonverbal behaviors that they gave to the experimental group, and it changed the patient outcomes. So I feel, there's ways that I do this in my classroom, which I'll explain at the end. And so these are some of the results that we've seen here and from other research of the therapeutic alliances, what they can do for patients in the medical setting. And you saw if I take their meds at a higher rate when they leave the hospital, they need fewer opioids. They're more alert, both pre and post, spend less time, they'll travel farther, wait longer, and pay more to see a compassionate physician. Same thing in the physical therapy plus, more pain relief. And it also said, interestingly enough, that the patient care providers experience less burnout and greater job satisfaction. By serving the patient with compassion, we're also managing our own emotional wellness. It feels more satisfying and rewarding to us. And Jen and I were talking about before our session started, I do a non-cognitive check-in at the beginning of every class where we talk about non-school things for the most part, whatever they want to talk about, and it's required. Everyone says something. And eventually students create their own narratives, someone with their pet, someone with their tattoo, someone with their car, I don't know, so their experience on the sports team and so on. And this week on Tuesday, class Tuesday and Thursday, and the captain of the football team says, Mr. Fallon, you're always asking us how we're doing, but we never ask you how you're doing. How are you doing? Anyhow, I told him a story how my dog's sick, and I took it to the vet after class on Tuesday, and the vet tech told me to feed my dog chicken and get her started eating again. It worked for her dog. And anyway, I just, I connected, and I put a picture of my dog on the screen, and, I added my narrative to the series of narratives in the class. And, that student was doing emotional wellness check on me, and he thought of it on his own. It wasn't like built into the exercise. So my personal philosophy is slow it down, but that's in the answer section. Like, the way to get students to learn more is not to speed it up, it's to slow it down and build in more compassion in that time saved. And we'll have better long-term results like the medical settings are seeing. This was another example about, I talk to the students when they're coming in, like I'm sure we all do. And then when I'm talking to the football players, and almost like 80% of my students, most of the students here, 70%, they said, the students at the university are in an athletic program. They're athletes. So I talk to them and they're coming in, you just come in, now I know their routines now. I know they weightlift at 6 a.m. They do film study at 7 a.m. They have my class at 8 a.m. They're required to do 1 hour of tutoring, 5 hours a week. I assume 1 hour a day, I don't know. They're required to do study table, which is different than tutoring, more like a study hall. And so now I kind of know their daily schedules. And then they also tell me where they're going that week and how far away is the bus ride and what state is it in. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, I feel like talking to the coach. Like, does he know what a lack of sleep can do to, like, I know cognitive performance or probably physical performance as well. I mean, if their day starts at 6 a.m. in the weight room, their day starts at 5:30 a.m. in their dorm room in order to get over to the gym. And 19 and 20-year-olds aren't going to bed at 9:30 p.m. like I am. So in any event, we're making these connections beyond the English class, and it's compassionate connections. Because a modification in my behavior is compassion. Like, I'm changing how I'm behaving toward the students. That's an act. It's not just a feeling. And that's what compassion is, a feeling and an action equals compassion. So I would say, at least for me, and I've already shared some others, these are 6 ways to demonstrate compassion. First of all, the first way is they exist. And if you want sometime, Google on your own, look at YouTube, and look for Anderson Cooper and JR. And it'll be between minutes 1 through 4 and the video. And it was an overtime on 60 Minutes, and they interviewed an artist in France, JR. And in any event, JR was talking about his philosophy of they exist, like he's always recording other people. So that's where I feel in my class, they exist. So for me, the students are more important than the material. It's person first, material second. Like I feel, and probably lots of others do as well, maybe even you, like talk to the person first before you have the student. So when you have the person in front of you, it starts with the person and then we migrate to the student. We don't go right into like class material. So, and one way to do that is a non-cognitive check-in, they exist, and ask them how they're doing. And I require them to respond to that. Now they're all pretty well comfortable with it. The second thing is take it slow. The Mayo Clinic did some research, and it said when patients come in for their first meeting with the doctor will listen for 11 seconds. And at the 11-second mark, that's the average amount of time before the doctor interrupts and then takes charge of the conversation and starts asking Terminator questions. How do you feel here? What happened there? In any event, and they found that when the doctors didn't interrupt, it took the patient 29 seconds to say what they needed to say before they stopped. So, I mean, come on. We only need to give them half a minute. Even in my non-cognitives, they're at the beginning of the class. It's just half a minute. If it goes longer than half a minute, it's because we're having a conversation. It's a win. So they exist, and to take it slow. Don't be like those 11-second doctors. And then meet them where they are. I know we've heard that a lot, but it's talk about their day or their life. And, and it happens in non-cognitive. It's at the start of class, where we make the personal connections. It's not about school. It's about their life. And like, it really doesn't matter. I've learned community college, university, because now I'm adjunct to the university, actually 2 universities. And the students, even at the university, have a life. Additionally, enhanced listening. So it requires some effort, but I can see it even in the Zooms, like who's nodding their head, who appears to like be looking when you're talking and so on. It registers. And then, continual questions, there's statements of compassion. Like I can only imagine how much competition there is for your time when a volleyball player tells me, she's playing in such and such city in Pennsylvania that's 7 hours away. It's like, wow, how do you even get your work done? And it's not a trick question. I'm trying to demonstrate compassion and just acknowledging, like, you have so much going on. I mean, you must do it on the Greyhound. I don't know, but I don't know how you do. And then last, I feel like we're in a field where emotional labor is a requirement. So when I say Showtime mindset, the doctors, I've read where the doctors say, patients have if they haven't only been waiting hours, they've been waiting days and weeks for an appointment to see me. Like my brain doctor didn't do it, my local one. I need to go into a Showtime mindset. I need to be like fully present and be interested and just connected when the patient's telling me about what it is that bothers them and so on. And my questions will be open-ended, continual questions versus, taking over the conversation for myself. But, when I go into Showtime mindset, it's not faking it. I feel like emotional labor is part of our job description. And if we put in emotional labor, it will come back to us in terms of improved effort by the students. And I can already see that. I can see students emailing me, texting me actually, because I give them my number. And the students don't take advantage. They don't inappropriately text you. They only text when they have legitimate things. And then they'll say, Mr. Fallon, I just turned in such and such in the Dropbox. I just wanted you to know, and so on. Like, I feel like they're going the extra mile because I felt like I went the extra mile for a while. So for me, the personal stories, but also these are 6 actions that I would say, and you'll have this PowerPoint afterwards, 6 actions to engage compassion. Now I would go to breakout groups. I'm going to end my screen share for a minute. If I can. Stop share. Hey, okay, we're back. I was going to breakouts and ask us to share stories with each other and then come back. But we are a breakout. So, and we do have 15 minutes, which is what it was intended to be. I don't know, does this resonate with you, or do you have stories you could share to help the rest of us? Because like for me, the non-cognitive check-in, it was an aha. Like I went to an ALP training, accelerated learning program, and Peter Adams was the one who introduced it to us. And I'm like, wow, the non-cognitive. I mean, it just resonated with me. And I make it part of all my classes, not just developmental, because for the connection. Well, I don't know, maybe you have an aha for me that the rest of us that you can share as well. So I'll just stop now for a bit.
I'll jump in. This is part of my class too, but I think it was kind of what you said. It took me a while, from when I was a brand new teacher to realizing that it's not really as much about the content as it is about the connection. And so one of the things that maybe a year, 2 years ago, I started doing was a semester after I had a student, I would get in touch and say, hey, how are you doing? And, I'm intentional about keeping names of people that I think might need me to check in again, ones that were, I spent a lot of time with. And just this week, I sent one out to a student that I had last semester who was struggling mightily with family issues and health issues. And so I just sent an email and said, hey, I see you're still on campus because I can see your schedule. And I just wanted to know how things were going. And she's like, well, I really appreciate it. My daughter was just diagnosed with cancer, and just started a conversation that only happened because I reached out. She never would have probably reached out to me. And that idea that as soon as they're done with me doesn't mean I'm done with them. They go on to other classes. A lot of times we don't see them, but they still need someone to say, hey, I know that you're still out there. So just a little thing that it takes time, but it seems to be, it's worth it to me. So.
Yeah, I'll add in. I'm curious if this was something that you were thinking of and practicing pre-pandemic, because I think certainly pandemic has also sort of rearranged how we think about what's important, and it's also made students so like grateful for their time with us. Like we just went back this fall in Illinois, or at least I did. There were some people who were teaching the healthcare workers in all the hands-on biology and the welders and all of those faculty were doing their thing, but the college had asked those of us who could teach without hands-on elements to be online because of the pandemic. And so for me, I was out of the classroom for almost 18 months. And when I went back, I've just heard multiple students talking about how happy they are to be there again and how invested they are in their own education. And it's not the same conversations that I heard pre-pandemic. Like they really do seem focused and grateful and wanting to come. So I think this idea, which is something that I too try to practice and did before the pandemic, it's something that I think they're really receptive to now, and they really want to make those connections.
Yeah, I have done it. I did do it before. And just because I think part of my reason is I've always been developmental ed. And even when I was in a K-12, I was with special ed. And so they seem to be a little bit more connected, but also to need more connection. So I have done it for, 3 or 4 years, but we only took like this from spring break to the end of the semester off. So we only had like 2 months off. So a lot of the students, they had that option of being online or Zoom, but they really wanted us back on campus in Iowa, and especially in DevEd. I mean, DevEd students do not do well without that connection. But yeah, I do. Just yesterday, I heard someone in class, a couple of students talking, and they're like, I'm not taking any Zoom live classes. I'm not taking anything online. It has to be face-to-face for me. And I get that. I'm the same way. I like the connection. I don't like being on the computer. You know, I can do it, and I'm pretty tech savvy, and I've always, you know, done a lot in the classroom, but I need people. And I think with DevEd especially, they need someone, they need their teacher. So, but yeah, I did it beforehand. It just seems to be more important now, maybe.
I appreciated your quote or your statistics about the doctors and the patients to the extent to which they thought that they were providing compassionate care. And I think all that you guys are talking about with the pandemic, I feel like I realized I've always felt like a really compassionate teacher, but like it just became so what we needed to be that we brought good new awareness to how compassionate we really are, right? So it would be good if we had some measure where we got to ask students, you know, because we might be surprised what that would be. But I think that's just really good for all of us to think that we may be thinking we're more compassionate than they're feeling, you know. And I hope I can take the compassionate Katie from COVID into the rest of my teaching, right? Because everything was like, yes. And now I'm a little more to be like, was it really late? You know, when in COVID, I'm like, honey, you got here, you're good, you know? So I think it's a good check, a good reality check for us to do that every now and then. So I appreciated that perspective.
You guys feel like your administration and your colleagues are being as compassionate as we want to be with our students? Are you getting, yeah. Okay, good. I was like, wait a minute, maybe everybody else is okay, good. I mean, not good that you're not.
I don't think it trickled up to administration. I don't think.
I was like, well, maybe everybody else is, but okay. Not
No,
I was in book
but-
club. I was in a book club. And the philosophy professor tagged me as English. He's like, I knew you were English. In other words, he doesn't have time for this touchy-feely stuff.
Oh.
Yeah, I would agree. Sorry, I think my Zoom froze. And I don't think all faculty adopted this compassion mindset during COVID. And I don't know if it's because our students write and so we get to see more of them, right? Because like I wouldn't describe myself as a touchy-feely person necessarily. But I definitely try to show that to my students. And I agree with Katie, like there were ways that I thought I was being compassionate before. And then COVID made me really think about, you know, policies that, you know, why were they there and why are they important anyway, right? One thing I did in Zoom last year, because my experience was almost exactly like Jen's. I was working from home for 18 months, right? And now we're back on campus. I would stay in my Zoom classes over the time. And I would say, you know, we're done with activities, we're done with content, but anybody who wants to chat with me about anything, just hang around, right? And I would turn the record button off. And it was rare that everybody left. There were almost always around 3 to 5 students who wanted to talk with me. And I've been trying really hard to do that in the classroom. So we're on 75-minute blocks, which is a good amount of time to do some nice learning activities or have them do writing or group work and still process it, right? I've been working really hard to leave 5 minutes at the end and class 5 minutes early and say, you know what, we're done with our activities. You're free to go if you wish to, but if you have anything you need to talk to me about, just hang around. And again, it's working the same as it did in Zoom. And I was terrible about that before. I was terrible about using all the time to get every last thing in that class day. And I'm going to keep doing this because students are responding to it. And like you said, you're putting the students first rather than whatever content I was going to jam into those 5 minutes.
I just want to say, I think I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording just in case.